हाँ, अभी शेयर करिए। प्रमोद
जी
ओके, जनरल पन्नू को भी हाईलाइट कर लीजिए।
जी
ओके, गुड इवनिंग, जय हिंद एवरीबडी। I welcome you today to our third and last session on disruptive technology. We have had two sessions which were very popular, and we had an immense response both on the Facebook as well as on the YouTube. In the final session today, we are going to talk on many important aspects. Plus, we will take on some questions which General Pannu has requested to answer. Before I hand over the mic to him, let me tell you one or two other developments which have taken place presently. Today, we are going through a pandemic of which comes once in a century. And what I want to tell you today is the Indian Armed Forces have mobilized themselves. The Indian Army has recalled their medical officers, about 800 of them in last 2 years, and about 8,000 paramedic staff. They have converted almost about 140 hospitals into where civilians can be given help in tackling this kind of a problem. In addition to that, the Navy has sent its ship to many places. The Air Force is flying day in and day out their Hercules aircraft and the other transport aircraft that they have. And I'm sure with this combined effort of the services as well as the country, we are going to overcome this pandemic in a short while. I'll now start with my topic. That is, today we are going to talk about contact, in contact, first non-kinetic and then kinetic. Last two sessions we saw as to what all can happen when we go to war with China. There are two questions that had come up which I'll request General Pannu to answer before he makes his opening remarks. First question has come from number of people, and they've asked, yes, we have done a lot of progress as far as disruptive technology is concerned, but have we been able to use this technology effectively in two places? Number one, the most affected area of central India, and number two, we have a vast border, the land border consisting of about 16,500 kilometers, and the sea borders or the coastline of about 7,600 kilometers. There are reports that illegal Bangladeshi migration takes place from the Indo-Bangladesh border. There are reports of smuggling and all from the Indo-Nepal border. And of course, the violence which takes place in the Maoist area is highlighted by the media regularly. So that is one aspect that people want you to comment upon. And then secondly, when you start talking of Ladakh, East Ladakh in particular, please tell us as to what kind of kinetic oblique non-kinetic forces were used by the Indian Army against the Chinese and vice versa. Maybe you could describe the battle for the Kailash Ridge also in a brief manner. With this opening remarks, over to you, General Pannu. I again forgot, before I hand over the mic to General Pannu, let me remind the listeners that we have a very distinguished Maratha Light Infantry officer today with us, who's raised the Defense Cyber Agency, who's been responsible for Special Forces Command. I mean, he's the one who's very qualified to talk on this topic because he retired as a Deputy Chief of Indian Army Staff, which looks after this subject. So with this opening remarks of mine, over to General Pannu.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan, for inviting me once again to Savarkar Smarak for the series of discussion on disruptive technology. Just to remind you that I was Deputy Chief in the Integrated Defense Staff, where Army, Navy, Air Force, all three come together. And it was interesting that, you know, after having commanded 14 Corps in Ladakh, that I was exposed to certain things which are building capability of all three services in an integrated manner, and also what the DRDO is doing or what technologies are being used in our own country and how they're going to come up and are coming up and also being fielded simultaneously. You asked two questions, and they were very prominent and important questions. One is how we are using technology in our operations against the Maoists in Chhattisgarh area or in the left-wing extremism. First and foremost, that the responsibility of conducting these operations lies with the Central Armed Forces police. And therefore, there is a lot of coordination which happens as far as training is concerned. The kind of technology which is being also used there is with the background that actually jungle warfare is quite a different kettle of fish. Not too many armies in the world are fighting jungle warfare. Foot to foot, like a guerrillas, they move from one place to another. Hide and seek is the modus operandi. And information and intelligence is something which is always lacking, because there is guerrilla movement which is very quick, and the dynamics are rapid changing situations and looking for opportunities to ambush our security forces. So as a result, to track a guerrilla becomes so much more difficult with technology. However, there have been certain drones which are being used there, and certain elements which give us better visibility of how the guerrillas are moving. But because the surprise factor is in the hands of a person who's there to attack, for example, an ambush, even in Manipur, a couple of years back, when one of our Dogra battalion was ambushed, such operations are really tying your hand behind and fighting, as was done in Sri Lanka, because you cannot use force which gets unjustified, and there should be no collateral damage. And because there are too many innocents, there are villages there. So fighting surgically in this kind of an environment that I've spoken about is extremely, extremely difficult. So therefore, technology definitely brings in better transparency and information, but you will find that force-on-force engagement would be very tricky. And it is not easy to fight this kind of a guerrilla warfare. As far as employment of the conventional forces are concerned along the LAC and the LC over a period of time, I think the kind of technology which has come in with the visibility across the border fencing, which is also the LC fencing now, there is a lot of equipment which goes into deploying to get you a better situational awareness, and you can have a deep look into the adversary's territory. Maybe one odd terrorist can sneak in here and there, but largely large bodies get caught. There are ground sensors, there are manned sensors, there are thermal imagers, there are many other areas where you find that there is a lot of integrated sensors plus visibility and sights, which all put together give them a good shooter sensor connect. So I think these technologies are being used, and also drones are increasingly being employed, where Pakistan is also using drones, but largely what is being invested is in anti-drone technology. Once you have the anti-drone technology, then you would want that the drones cannot really walk in and fly in the way they do, deliver stuff, or even do carry out surveillance, which is going to be more and more difficult. It is very difficult to shoot a drone, which is very small in size and it maneuvers very fast. But there are technologies which are being employed, which basically interfere with the frequencies, because after all, there is remote control apparatus which is controlling the drone. So therefore, if that remote control connect is interfered with, there are a huge amount of technologies which are also being fielded now.
Thanks a lot. There is an impromptu question which has come up. We have talked about this corona of the Chinese virus, which is creating a problem and the pandemic, but still doesn't know when will you overcome it. Now, there are a lot of reports floating around, especially in the social media, which talk about their questioning as to why the second wave is started only in India. Because when you talk of India, it consists of Indian subcontinent consisting of, let's say, Bhutan and Nepal and Bangladesh and Pakistan. If you purely go by media reports, there is no second wave which is struck as badly as it struck up in India. So there are a number of people who feel that possibly this is some kind of a biological war, call it biological terrorism, biological world war. Your comments, and then we can go on to East Ladakh, please.
I think the beginning of coronavirus, which started from Wuhan, was basically to disrupt the entire growth and bring in disruption in the economy. and business and trade of all the developing and developed countries. That has been achieved to quite an extent, because why would China initially get this entire globe into the morass of this virus and then attack? You see, militarily, he moved behind as if you're moving behind a barrage. Those who understand warfare know that there's going to be a barrage of artillery fire behind which the infantry walks in. And I think COVID was used as a barrage. And I suppose once it is spun into the human being globally, then I said it takes its own course. But I think it has been created in a manner that it will mutate itself so that human being becomes quite defenseless. I think the second wave always comes. And I think, as you very rightly said, it happens once in a century. At that time also, second wave and third waves came. I think those are the waves which are coming in because of large population. I suppose we are feeling the brunt of this more. But largely, I think the globe also has suffered the first and the second wave.
Thanks a lot. Now, I would want you to focus on the Chinese front. When we talk of the Indo-China border, we have the East Ladakh, then you have the Uttarakhand area, then you have Sikkim, and then you have Arunachal Pradesh. And traditionally, we have been saying that if it comes to a war with China, then possibly he will go more for Arunachal Pradesh because there are targets like Tawang and all. So there have been certain appreciations in the past. To the best of my knowledge, whatever little service I have, one is never talked about East Ladakh being in limelight, East Ladakh being a center of warfare, which is happening since last about 1 year now. So now, please throw some light on our, if there's a problem with China, then the kinetic and the non-kinetic aspects which he will use against us and are counter to whatever he does, either in Arunachal or in Sikkim or for that matter in East Ladakh. Over to you, General.
Brigadier Mahajan, we are all aware that China and Pakistan put together want to continue to internationalize the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. They want to constantly keep saying that Jammu and Kashmir is a disputed territory in which one part of excision is with China and the other part of POK and POK and Gilgit-Baltistan is with Pakistan. As a result, when any Indian statement comes on the J&K or the sovereignty which we look at as part of India, of this entire territory, they look at sovereignty very differently. So as a result, what both have done in collaboration is that they have actually built a CPEC corridor, which has got a direct connection of G219, the highway which goes through Excision also. So if you're going to build the economic corridors through this, obviously you have to prove a point that you are not sitting at the wrong place, because India did not support the One Belt, One Road initiative of China, because it goes through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, which is Indian territory. So as a result, largely, their emphasis on Eastern Ladakh is from a prism of giving a legitimate, claims on their OBOR or One Belt and One Road initiative, that it is legitimate because it goes through a territory which is not of India. And I think that is what they keep proving. And similarly, that is an extension which has also happened in East Ladakh when they realize that India is also building a huge amount of infrastructure in that area. They want to dominate certain areas and embarrass India at the same time, trying to tell the world that India cannot match up to China. So I suppose that is the geostrategic significance of J&K, which is quite different than what it is there in Arunachal Pradesh.
You mentioned about the infrastructure in Ladakh. Anybody who served in Ladakh, I remember in the early 80s when we used to go there, there was only one axis which used to go from Srinagar, Zojira, then thereafter Dras, going to Kargil and Leh. Now we opened up another axis which comes via the Khardungla Pass. Now there's another third one via the Atal Tunnel which is coming up. So can you just very briefly tell us about as to what infrastructure development has taken place in the recent times, and what are the new things that are going to come up there in that area, so that our battle preparedness there improves, our capability to move troops improves, and most important, this area will remain open 12 months in a year, which it is presently not. Presently, when there's a snowfall for 5 to 6 months, Zojila gets closed. We are going to go have a tunnel underneath Zojila, and the Atal tunnel has just come up. So just tell us as to what all things have happened for good and what is more expected in the coming days to come. Over to you, Janpan.
Brigadier Mahajan, you very rightly said that Ladakh was an isolated area earlier because of the Great Himalayan ranges, which actually make it very difficult to go through the passes. And therefore, tunneling has been a project which has been taken on by this government. And very recently, last year, the tunnel, was opened, which is the Atal tunnel. So therefore, both even Zojila, there is a project which is now being accelerated. So I think these both tunnels and also the rail project is coming up in both these areas. So you would see that some amount of relief which has happened in the friction that was there with the terrain has quite been eased off, and about 6 to 7 hours of struggling through the long winding roads has eased off, and therefore our preparation and our induction into Ladakh from last year is getting much easier. This year also you realize that the passes were blocked only for a very little while and not for 5 months or 6 months as used to happen in the past. Even the Aero Bridge is working quite well when the kind of airfields, the infrastructure and the kind of investment which is the Indian Air Force transport fleet provides is also quite good. And therefore, all three put together makes Ladakh area which can be defended with much ease. And I suppose by next couple of years and in a decade, I suppose it will be completely connected in a manner that you would not even feel that Ladakh was ever isolated and a place where, during winters, they had to be cut off.
Those are really reassuring words. I would now want you to focus on Galwan as to how did we reach the Galwan level, what happened in Galwan, because a lot of officers, a lot of army officers have compared the Battle of Galwan or what happened on Galwan on the night 14th, 15th August with Battle of Rezangla. You would of course remember that Rezangla was a place where Paramveer Chakra was won and Chushul was saved, So can you just focus on the Battle of Galwan, what happened there, what did the Chinese do, how did we react to it, and then thereafter we'll come to Kailash Ridge. General Panno.
Actually, Galwan clash happened on 15th of June, which happened to be by design or coincidentally Xi Jinping's birthday. Maybe the Chinese are trying to prove something on that day, and they went in for a clash. Of course, Indians lost 20 soldiers, but I think the way Indians reacted to it, 50 to 60, and sometimes, I've also heard figures of more than 60 to 70 of Chinese soldiers having lost their lives. Having said that, today's topic is non-kinetic contact. And literally speaking, this was contact and it was a clash which was non-kinetic. But I think the kind of, weapons, handheld weapons that they were used in that kind of a clash was, sticks and, modified bats with barbed wire on it. That is the kind of very barbaric and primitive way of war fighting that the Chinese adopted. So therefore, when you say contact and non-kinetic, really speaking, there is a history between India and China of almost, initial 12 years where there was no contact till the time we fought 62 war. And then after 62 war, for 5 years again, there was very little contact till the time at Nathula, both sides clashed and the Chinese got a nice thrashing at Nathula in 1967. And then again, there was a lull of 8 years where hardly any patrols came to the line of actual control. And when the Indian troops started building posts, then the Assam Rifle Post at Tulungla was attacked in 1975 when 4 of our soldiers laid down their life. I think that was the last until 86 when they came into Somdrongchu, taking advantage of our forward posture that we had announced. And we were building certain areas and we went on to areas very close to the LAC or dominating heights. And as a counter to that, they came and occupied Somdrongchu, which is still held by them. But between then and 2020, literally, there has been a lot of patrolling and number of intrusions and even clashes have happened, but no life was lost for almost 45 years. It is only during Galwan that the lives got lost, and it was completely non-kinetic of the kind that there was no shooting which happened, but there was a contact. So the contact traditionally has been happening between the Indian and the Chinese troops through very close contact in patrolling. And they've also been intruding into areas which they claim as their claim lines, but I think Indian troops have been pushing them out in a very disciplined manner. But between the two armies and between the two nations, a couple of protocol agreements were signed not to use the military equipment to fire or to defend and take this to a military clash. So as a result, this year and last year, this kind of action with the Chinese have done on ground was completely abrogating all the rules and the procedures, and also the agreements were disregarded and thrown out of the window by the Chinese. So as a result, these are the kind of non-contact or contact non-kinetic application of force has been happening. But when you talk about technology, you find that the demonstration of technology has literally been through infrastructure development of roads and bridges very rapidly that Chinese have constructed to come into Tibet. And they have also upgraded their forward airfields. They have built large number of tunnels to put their logistics and armament into it. They believe in force projection because they come out of those tunnels and very quickly reappear, and they create a threat. And they have actually managed the LAC through force projection, which is threat-based. They have been using the ATVs, the articulated all-terrain vehicles, the heated vehicles. They come, through infrastructure. They come with a lot of speed to demonstrate the credibility. So, that is how they have built up, and that is the reason that though Indians continue to maintain the protocols and the respect of the agreement, but the Chinese wanted to demonstrate how quickly they can come and surprise the Indians, and that is precisely what led to Galwan and certain areas where the Chinese very quickly intruded, and Indian troops with their might of power of a soldier and the innovation, grit, determination, and the experience of the Indian Army. I think they have not tasted this for very long. They did not realize that the Indian Army is modern, highly trained, highly motivated, and they're super soldiers, coming from rural areas. I think the moment they saw this, the Chinese did not know how to do, and even the Indian Army occupying southern part of the Pegongso area, which is known as the Kailash Range by many people. So that kind of a force projection, which Indians in a counter offensive or counter deployment did, I think took completely Chinese by surprise. And as a result, the weakness of the PLA came to the fore, where their soldiers are being given very high comfort, and they are employed at a very low risk because the Chinese don't want to risk. They're very scared, for n number of reasons. On short tenure, they want to just save their health, and they don't want to lose their life or limb. And because, all of them belong to some trade and industry, and, they want to go back and start helping out their families into business. So as a result, this is kind of a conscript army, highly unmotivated, and wanting to only come and display the firepower and the technology. But I suppose when it comes to force on force, the Chinese have completely got surprised, and they have pulled back now. I'm very sure they must be reworking on their own strategy. But one thing which is coming out very clearly is that as defender, the Chinese cannot afford to push with whatever they have, the force level and the kind of soldiers that they have, and they want to outsource this kind of a venture, not to human being, but to technology. And that is where they're constantly investing in disruptive technology, so that they cannot afford to have soldiers who are not going to fight and not prepared to fight. And Indian soldier is not going to let them, dominate in any way. So as a result, I think they are increasingly using the disruptive technology for rapid acclimatization, because they've got those chambers to acclimatize. They build their medical facilities very close. Their camps are made so comfortably because otherwise the Chinese soldiers refuse to serve in these high altitude and tough areas. It gets very difficult to motivate the Chinese soldiers, make them fight the Indians on ground. And that is precisely where they are. And I'm very proud that as 14 Corps commander and as somebody who served the Indian Army and served in super high altitude areas and have faced the Chinese, knowing the truth, I think I feel very blessed that I was part of the Indian Army always. And I think our troops will never, never, never let anybody down. And that is huge amount of reassurance that the nation needs to get.
Thanks for your comment. This is exactly what General Rawat had also said, that the Chinese are wanting to use certain disruptive technologies and scare the Indian Army, which they were not able to do. And you very rightly said, they want to win war with only technologies and not with soldiers, because the soldiers are not capable of fighting. Before we wind up this session, I would ask you for your closing comments on what do you think is going to happen. Now summers are around the corner and the snow would melt off and all. So what do you think the Chinese will do as far as East Ladakh is concerned, Sikkim and other areas are concerned, say in a time frame of about 6 months, 1 year, and then of course in a time frame of about 4 to 5 years, what kind of a threat we would expect to come from Chinese as a nation? Your closing comments, please.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan. The Chinese will obviously constantly keep looking at excuses to embarrass the Indians wherever they can, by surprising, making statements, offering help and stabbing you behind. That is how it is going to be. Chinese are not going to be comfortable with the idea of ever calling India a rising power. They would want India to be seen as a very weak and dependent power on the outer world, and what better for them if it becomes dependent on the Chinese technology and Chinese trade. I think they would want Indians not to block any progress of the Chinese, either in the geostrategic and geopolitical sphere, and allow them to have a nice free race with the United States, with the aim that the Chinese should cross the United States and become the sole superpower before 2050. The Chinese are going to constantly keep, needling us wherever it embarrasses India. And I think we have to be very, very careful that the war is not going to be just one-time war. I think it's a long-time war as unrestricted warfare being spoken about. I think they are going to practice it, and with technology.
Thank you very much for your comments. All that I would like to say in the end is we have had 3 sessions on disruptive technologies, and it would become amply clear to everybody that while China is ahead as far as these technologies are concerned, we are catching up. And in a time frame of say next 2 to 3 years or 4 years, we will definitely be up to the mark. As far as the second part is concerned, remember, war is a combination of technology and human beings. And one would remember that in all army training establishments, right from NDA to Higher Command, NDC, they talk about one important element called the human element of war. There's a weapon, there's a human being which operates the weapon. And it is always said that the human being is more important than the weapon itself. This is not to say that do not improve on the technology. We must catch up with the technology. We must improve there. We must build up our infrastructure. And also what is important is the nation must stand behind the armed forces. Because a lot of time what happens is when something is happening in Galwan, something is happening on the Kailash Ridge, at times you get an effort, if you get a feeling looking at the media that what is happening there is not very important. The media is focusing on something else. They do not understand that here Indian Army is sacrificing a life, and the kind of an importance which fighting soldiers must get, that is not done adequately. So I'm sure with this 3 illuminating sessions, we have all understood as to how China is going to behave in the future. And like what General Pannu said, it's a long drawn battle. This is what one must remember. It's not going to finish off in a short while. So we as a nation must unite, stand behind the armed forces, and improve ourselves in all aspects of technology and other fields so that we're able to take on China head on. Thank you very much, General Pannu, for all your illuminating views on all the 3 sessions. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan. Jai Hind. What a pleasure it was talking with you.